Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I am Dr. Carmen Imes, and we are diving into Exodus chapter 23, verse 1. We're in the middle of what's known as the Covenant Scroll. We're looking at the Mishpatim, and in this section of God's instructions at Mount Sinai, there's an alternation between holiness and social responsibility. Today's section falls in the social responsibility category. And we're going to look at the first 8 verses of the chapter, which alternate between perversion of justice and neighborly behavior. Next week's video will wrap up this social responsibility section with the final 2 Sabbath practices that are related to neighborly behavior. So I'm going to begin reading in chapter 23, verse 1. Do not carry a false report. Do not shake hands with a guilty person in order to become a violent witness. Do not follow a crowd to do wrong. Do not testify in a dispute in order to turn a crowd in twisting justice. Do not favor the poor in his dispute. When you encounter the bull of your enemy, or his donkey wandering off, you must surely return it to him. When you see a donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you must stop from leaving him. You must surely relieve it. You must not pervert a just decision for your poor neighbor in his lawsuit. Distance yourself from speaking falsehood. An innocent and righteous one do not kill, for I will not declare the guilty righteous. Do not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the sighted and perverts the words of the righteous. Okay, so it might have felt like that was kind of a random hodgepodge of things, especially that we've got 2 sections of laws that have to do with courts, and then sandwiched in between them are these laws about helping your neighbor's animal. Those laws go together for reasons that we'll discuss in a moment. Verse 1, to carry a false or empty report was to disseminate it. That is, to listen to someone telling you something that's false and then spread that gossip to someone else or testify falsely against someone to a judge. The judicial system, such as it was, and it wasn't super developed at this point in history, it required trust between neighbors. To agree to help a guilty party by testifying falsely against an innocent party was an act of violence. The phrase violent witness also appears in Deuteronomy 19, verses 16 through 19, where the perpetrator receives the punishment he tried to foist on the defendant. So in other words, if you testify falsely against someone violently, because you're trying to get them to be punished for something they did not do, then the right response is for the judge to give you the penalty that you were trying to get put on the other party. Peer pressure is a real problem in the courtroom scene. It's a particular threat in the quest to decide disputes. So when the tide of public opinion is going one way, standing against justice, society itself becomes twisted. A person of integrity will neither cave to the will of others by doing evil or by testifying falsely, because either behavior results in injustice. Favoritism is another threat to justice. It says in verse 3, do not favor the poor in his dispute. Now, the temptation of some people would be to favor the rich who can pay you back or benefit you in some way. But other people might favor the poor, assuming that those who are downtrodden are the most innocent. But this text suggests that the financial standing of the accused or the accuser should not be a factor in any court case. God is adamant that the vulnerable are not to be mistreated, but they're also not to be favored in a lawsuit against them. To be poor is not automatically to be right. This law upholds the principle that justice should be pursued regardless of the economic status of the accused. Some people feel like verse 3 is so out of place, this idea of not favoring the poor in his dispute, that they actually amend the Hebrew text, changing the word poor, dal, to read great, gadol. So two of the same consonants and just adding one to that. So dal gadol. However, no manuscript evidence supports this. There's no evidence that it should read great. Leviticus 19:15 offers an exegetical expansion of this verse with similar wordplay when it says not to lift the face of the poor, or the dal, or honor the face of the great, gadol. So there it's putting them side by side and encouraging a similar response, that we're not supposed to favor someone either because they're poor or because they're great. Favoritism just really doesn't have a place in court. Instructions regarding legal disputes that we've just read in verses 1 through 3 and coming up in verses 6 through 8 are interrupted by verses 4 and 5, which are laws about adversaries. It seems to me that these two verses about your neighbor or your adversary's animals is regulating the behavior towards people that you might be in the middle of a court case with, regulating your behavior outside of courts. How should we treat one another? How can we encourage neighborly behavior even outside of court? The animals here are members of his household and are his primary means for food production. This is not how we think about animals most of the time in the West, unless you're a farmer. But encountering the bull or donkey of your enemy wandering off, that's like if you found his car on the side of the road and it was abandoned and you knew that someone must have stolen it and taken it there. Your job is to bring it back to your neighbor. So by addressing the behavior of those outside of court, these laws encourage neighbor love for those who are involved in disputes. Now, bull and donkey, or ox and donkey, are not the only animals that we need to be thinking about here. These are just stand-ins for any animal belonging to your neighbor. A wandering sheep, a goat, a camel would qualify these days, a vehicle, a bicycle, just anything really of value that belongs to your neighbor. So whether the person is an enemy or someone who hates you, someone you dislike or someone who dislikes you, and whether or not they are present when you come across their property, the command is to help them. If people take advantage of neighbors they dislike when they're not around, or snicker and walk on by when they're struggling with a task, then society devolves until everyone is suspicious and full of hate. The cycle can be broken by those who look out for their neighbor's best interests, whether or not they get along. Let's be good neighbors. So some have suggested that these verses are mainly about humane treatment of animals. And while that's certainly one entailment of these commands, the focus is on protecting the resources belonging to one's neighbor. And livestock were essential tools of the Israelite economy. So verse 5, where it says, when you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, this presumes that the enemy is with his animal, but struggling to help it or make it continue. So it says, you must stop from leaving him. That is, presumably, you could read it either way, but I think it's more persuasive to read it as leaving your neighbor who's stuck there with the animal and can't make them move, because the animal's lying down under its load. The wordplay in this verse in Hebrew is challenging to translate because the same word azav appears twice, but with two different meanings. So you must stop from leaving him, me azav. You must surely relieve it with him, azov ta'azov. So the first occurrence means to forsake, and it's parallel to the Arabic word azav, while the second occurrence likely means to arrange, and it's parallel to the Ugaritic with the same consonants, or adav, to arrange the load. So I've tried to retain the wordplay between these two different uses of azav by saying leave and relieve. When you see a donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you must stop from leaving him. Don't just keep walking. You must surely relieve it. That is, relieve the load on the animal's back so that it could stand up and continue to move. Interpersonal grievances should not take priority over basic human decency. Yeah, you're not getting along with a particular neighbor. You have beef with your neighbor. That doesn't relieve you of the responsibility to still act like a good neighbor. So while this command treats an extreme case, that is the case of an enemy who's struggling and meets misfortune, it presumes that one who is your friend, you would naturally stop to help. Likely Deuteronomy 22, 1 through 4 points to this wider application because it specifies any fellow Israelite, not just your enemy that you come across. Now to verses 6 through 8. These verses return to the question of judicial practices. So while verse 3 that we talked about earlier aims to prevent special favors for the poor during a lawsuit, verse 6 aims to prevent unfair treatment of the poor. You must not pervert a just decision for your poor neighbor in his lawsuit. Those with financial means may not take advantage of the poor who lack representation. The economic status of the plaintiff must not influence a legal decision. Those making decisions should never accept a bribe because it prevents an impartial verdict. You're going to be inclined towards favoring those who've given you money. Not only should God's people tell the truth, but they should refuse to have anything to do with speaking falsehood. This echoes again the ideas of verses 1 and 2, which warn not to associate with those who are bent on doing wrong. Anyone who participates in an unjust decision resulting in the death penalty will bear the guilt themselves. It will be as though you have murdered that person. Notice how the concern of these laws is to restrain those in power from harming others. Every member of the Israelite society was responsible for upholding justice in their words and in their deeds. Those who stand to benefit from injustice are in a precarious position for which strict refusal to accept favors or bribes is the only way to ensure integrity and wisdom. So much here that we can put into practice even in the modern day, even though the United States or whatever country you're living in is not ancient Israel, and it's not a theocracy, and the Torah does not apply as civil legislation. We can still, in our personal lives, adopt these modes of living by integrity and being a good neighbor. And if all of us leaned into this, imagine what a world we would have. Have a great week.